LBC with Tom Swarbrick. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850.
No, I don't think it is in any way xenophobic to look at Chinese involvement in our nuclear facilities, particularly power, and think there may be an issue of national security there, given what we already know about Chinese state-backed cyber hacking in Britain. And that's not just coming from randomers, that's coming from the former head of GCHQ and the former head of MI5 are citing examples where this may well have been the case. We have to say may well because Lord knows you do not want to be attempted to be sued by the Chinese government. Let's speak to Professor Carl Gottlieb now on this issue, cybersecurity consultant. Afternoon, Professor.
Afternoon, Tom.
Were your hairs on the back of the neck raised when you heard about how much involvement China as a state was going to have in this crucial piece of infrastructure?
I'll be honest, Tom, the answer is no. This isn't the first time we're engaged with China on many large projects, especially in critical infrastructure. And I think we've got much bigger things to be worrying about outside of this.
In what kind of things?
So let's take your point about Lenovo a few minutes ago. So there's been many cases of Chinese involvement in state-sponsored hacking of the UK and other organizations and other countries. So let's focus on what happened with Lenovo. So back in the mid-2000s, the Five Eyes organizations, so that's the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they agreed that their critical government systems wouldn't run on Lenovo because they had fears. And there's been other fears since then as well, such as you mentioned about Huawei. But what we've managed to do is have GCHQ oversee those.
Right.
So you just mentioned about Huawei. In Banbury, there's a place called the Cell where GCHQ oversee Huawei, making sure their kit is up to scratch.
So the checks are put in place because of what we know about China.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You know, we have to remember that the UK is a world leader in cyber intelligence and espionage. You know, we tap much of the internet. We're one of the best spy agencies in the world. So we know what's going on. We have some of the very, very best protection people out there.
So let me ask you the question from another perspective. How much state British involvement in cyber hacking of places like China, Russia, and maybe America is there?
Massive. You know,
really?
Absolutely massive. Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a reason that we tap the undersea cables off the coast of the UK so we can see all internet traffic between Europe and the US.
No way.
And also, yeah, absolutely. You know,
sorry, I don't know. That's the naivety here is clearly on display. I just find that absolutely fascinating.
So the way it works, if you imagine all of the internet is flowing over undersea cables all around the world, and there's only about 5 or 10 major telco companies that run those and own them. And the US and the UK, we tap them so that we can look at every bit of traffic going through them. And we also tap and spy on other countries that we've got residences in. So let's say the US in Iraq, they'll be looking at all the phone calls and going ons there, and we can search through that within GCHQ and the NSA. So, you know, we're very good at this, and don't think that China or Russia are the only ones having any malicious intent here.
So we can't play the victim card if we're going to go into business with the Chinese state, because as much as we want their business post-Brexit now, when we do deals with them in China, there might be a reaction which says, well, hang on a sec, we know of British involvement in perhaps cyber hacking that goes on in China.
Exactly. You know, you look at when there was a state-sponsored hack of the Iranian nuclear centrifuges that took back their nuclear ambitions many years, and that was state-sponsored by Israel.
Someone hacked into the centrifuge of an Iranian nuclear power plant?
Yes, this is very relevant because we're talking about critical infrastructure here. So many years ago, the US and Israel, and potentially the UK, got together to build a virus, essentially. That got loaded into the Iranian nuclear facility that was being built. And what they wanted to do was remotely damage their ambitions. So the way they did that was create a virus that caused the nuclear centrifuges to spin fast and slow repeatedly until they actually broke the facility. And that set it back many, many years. So that's one of the sort of very public state-sponsored hackings where have actually caused physical damage.
But you believe that our security is so good, that we are such world leaders in this, that any nuclear plant we have wouldn't have that problem?
I think the best way of looking at it is to say what is the benefit of having a nuclear plant for China? You know, when we look at China, we've got two sides to it. We've got the legitimate side and the malicious side. Same for the UK and for the US. You know, legitimate side is all about business and politics, and their focus really is about, you know, they help us with their money. They create dependence. You know, is it supposedly 7% of electricity is going to go through Hinkley? And once we have that dependence on China, suddenly they have leverage to create influence and power. But if they wanted to hack us, why spend 20 years building something to do that? Their big focus really is just to carry on doing the basic things they do every day. Sending you phishing emails, assuming you and I will reuse our passwords, which we do. Breaches like Ashley Madison we discussed many years ago, a year ago, and they do the basics. If they want to hack you, they'll hack you, and they already are.
Carl, wait there, if you would. We've got a couple of minutes, because I want to bring in Jeanette. Jeanette's in Wandsworth, and Jeanette, you have a Lenovo computer.
Oh, sorry, no, I don't have a Lenovo computer, but I was considering buying one. Yeah. And actually, a thought that crossed my mind was, will the Chinese be able to hack it? And so, given what one of your previous callers said, I'm now not going to buy one, actually.
Really?
I do feel nervous. And also, I just wanted to say about the Chinese, is it the leader, the Prime Minister,
yes,
Xi Jinping? There was a very insightful program about him and how he'd climbed up the ladder, being a man that nobody knows anything about. And I was telling my mother about this, and she told me a very short poem that she learned as a young girl. She was born in the 30s. And it just seemed to me to fit this guy very precisely. So the poem is by Longfellow, very short. The heights of great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but whilst their companions slept, were toiling upward through the night. So, I feel if the Chinese are willing to wait 20 years to, build this thing, and I just don't trust them.
Well, Jeanette, thank you. I didn't expect to get poetry thrown in with that call, and thank you nonetheless. Carl, is Jeanette right to be worried?
Not about Lenovo, and not about them specifically. So Lenovo and Dell, more worryingly, have been involved in installing rubbish software. The kind of stuff where you get a new PC and it's got all this kind of software that you don't want installed on it at the start. Now, they were involved in a bit of a scandal where it was insecure by default. What I would recommend to Jeanette is to say, if you're not looking at Lenovo, look at something maybe a bit more secure. So the most secure one out there at the moment people are talking about is the Google Chromebook. That's the kind of laptop that's very, very secure and very easy for people to use.
But clearly the wider concerns about Chinese state involvement in these kinds of pieces of infrastructure, that's not going to go away. And it is right, if that is the main reason why Theresa May has put a pause on this, that is looked at in depth in order to make sure that there's nothing underhand going on. But as you've said, Professor, what is the point of waiting 20 years to try and build something that can do it when they're doing it anyway?
Yep, absolutely. I work with many utilities and finance companies, and China's always at the top of their list in terms of fears of cyber attack, and it's going on, every second right now. And Beijing is a big concern for us, but we need to focus on the rest of critical national infrastructure. So we've talked really about transport and utilities here, but what about food? What about water? What about emergency services? So I'll give you an example. Let's say our emergency service provider, the telco involved in that, is a third-party company. Then maybe it's Turkish technology. A very quick regime change there, and suddenly a change to that could disable 999. What if our food network suddenly grinds to a halt? What if the M6 grinds to a halt? What would that mean for our food transportation? So there's a lot bigger things in critical infrastructure than just, let's say, a 20-year plan for building a nuclear.
Professor, great to have you on the phone this hour. Professor Carl Gottlieb, cyber security consultant. I told you I was fascinated by this stuff. I know it's sort of slightly naive and ignorant to come and go, what? When Carl talks about an Iranian nuclear centrifuge that was hacked remotely. But I just think that this is the new world that we are entering into. Clearly, as Carl says, it's happening every second of every minute that these attacks are taking place. And whether it does give rise to an idea that maybe that there are some parts of Britain that are just not for sale to even the highest bidder for many of the most stable governments around the world, because we need to be in control of those parts of this country. Carl mentions food and water and the emergency services. Can you imagine if those fell victim to a regime change somewhere around the world that meant that we were going to be in trouble because we'd farmed them out for however many tens of billions of pounds to the highest bidder?